Okay.
Morning, friends. Pardon me, bit of a sore cough today. Good morning, friends, and welcome to the Friday Talks. We are going to have an interesting time now, because it is that time when friends get chatted to and asked of their life. And today, an interesting lady, Rosie Thayer, will be interviewed by our Patsy. Patsy and Rosie, it's over to you.
Thank you. Hello, Rosie. Thank you ever so much for Phil, agreeing to share these things with us, and I'm looking forward to it very much. I was going to start by asking you where you grew up and what it was like there.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, although I was born in Limerick because my parents worked there in a live-in position, and then that was followed up by a similar position in Kildare. I tell everybody really I'm from Dublin because from the age of 4, that's where I lived. Essentially, my father was ill and unable to work, and in order to find a house to live in, our family stayed with her brother and wife and children, while the Dublin Corporation, so the equivalent of the council, came along and made an assessment, and then we were allocated a house. And the house was in Ballyfermot, and it was kind of what we'd now call a new town. And it was created around sort of 1951 or thereabouts. There were lots and lots of tenement buildings in Dublin city centre. Huge overcrowding, lots of families sharing one toilet and bathroom and so on. So this new huge housing estate was created. And of course, typically, lots of houses were built, but very little infrastructure at the same time. So all these families kind of decamped out to Ballyfermot to start this new life, but some of them were still having to go into the city to go to school. And for the few people who managed to find work, there was huge unemployment at the time. Some people had to go in to Dublin city. Now, it was only about 5 miles. Ballyfermot was only about 5 miles. And I have fond memories of travelling on the 78 bus to go into the town centre. But the amazing thing was that you can imagine in Ireland and in Dublin that the church was very powerful, and there was the nearest thing to a church Ballyfermot started off with was a storage shed that used to be used by Dublin Transport Company. And Father Canon Troy was allocated as the first parish priest, and so he used that shed, if you like, as the first church. So you can imagine very few people would fit inside, and lots of people were outside. I think they said the population was nearly 2,000 people, 1,980 or something. So you can imagine this huge community of people, and of course no local schools either. But interestingly, the priest was very well connected, and he asked the Daughters of Charity would they come and start a school. But as I say, Ballyfermot was streets and streets and streets of houses, and really the church provided, if you like, activities, because of course people didn't have money for entertainment. Very few people had televisions. So a lot of activity like church retreats and May Day processions and all of these kind of things were the sort of things that people went to, and a way of meeting up. They did decide that they'd like to build a church. And so a group of people did what were known as the weekly collections. So all the families were given a little envelope, and many of them only had pennies in it, but eventually they did raise enough to make a church. I'm trying to think, because some of the questions cross over.
That's fine.
But I would say again that the church was really important, and various youth groups and clubs came out of the church connections. And there was a group called the Newlyweds Club, because of course lots of newlyweds were allocated these new houses, and they got together and tried to organise activities and help new families get settled. One of the nice things about where we lived on Cleggeen Avenue was that we had good and kind neighbours. Mrs. Travers lived next door, and there was a little half wall between the two houses. And really, I think Mrs. Travers was my mother's sanity, because it was a huge culture shock for her to move into this area with all these weird and wonderful people from Dublin city centre. And it was full of characters, shall I say.
Well, what sort of, how many children were there in your family? Did you have brothers?
Yeah, I was the eldest of 5, so I kind of almost co-parented with my mother. So I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Because in the early 60s, again, I was talking about high unemployment, my dad had to go to England to find work. So he could only afford to come home in the summer holidays and at Christmas time. So being the eldest, I had a lot of responsibility, as I said, helping my mother with the younger ones. So I did a lot of caring and so on. I do remember one time being horrified. I'd been told so often not to drop any of the babies on their head. I was nursing my youngest brother, and of course he slid off the sofa and whacked his head. So I still say to him every now and then, "I'm so sorry, Raymond, but it's my fault you are the way you are." Okay. They were the siblings. I mean, I was the eldest. I think I was a bit bossy. Surprise, surprise. And tried to kind of, keep them in line. But, I would have had to get them up in the morning for school and make a big pot of porridge and get them fed and out the door type of thing. And my middle brother, bless him, well, actually, both brothers who went to the Christian Brothers School had a very hard time there. And I really only appreciated that as an adult. But sometimes I had to chase them down the road to get them to go to school because they really didn't want to go. Bless them. So I feel bad in retrospect.
Well, were they harsh on punishments and things like that?
They were. I mean, they used the ruler, so they were regularly slapped. And some children had literally came home with blisters on their hands and their knuckles from the treatment they got. It didn't have a great reputation. I'd have to say it was very kind of severe, more control, I think, than any sort of holistic approach to education.
What about your school? Was that like that, or was it better?
I loved school. I went to St. Louise's primary school at the age of 5, and before I got there, my mother had taught me how to knit, because she was great at knitting, and she used to knit Aran sweaters, and that was a way of making a bit of money to support the family. But I can remember my first day at school, and we were all sitting in these cloakrooms, and then we were allocated to our classes. Now, if memory serves, there were about 50 pupils to each class to begin with, and then I think it went down to about 30. But I was so excited about being there, and I had my knitting in a little drawstring bag that my mother had made for me. And I couldn't understand why all these other children were crying. They were screaming for their mummies and, very, very unhappy. But I couldn't wait. I was excited to be there. But one of the first things we had to learn was how to say in Irish, I need to go to the toilet. So you had to put your hand up and say, Will Cadagum Dulamach Moshe the Holly. And unfortunately, some of the children were so upset they didn't quite make it. So there was a few dramas. I felt so sorry for them. I don't know, David, if you're able to find the picture of Sister Columkill, but I'll talk about her.
That would be great, yeah. Any chance?
So, of course, our nuns, when I started school, had the wimple hats. No, I was going to keep going back. There, yeah, that's it.
Oh, wow.
As you can see, they had the wimple headdress, and they used to be referred to locally as the butterfly nuns.
Right.
Because of their attire. So these were the daughters of Charity. And Sister Columkill was the head nun in our primary school. And she was a marvelous, marvelous woman. She was very strict, but really, you know, underneath it had a heart of gold. And, you know, she took great pride in her pupils. And I remember being selected to do all sorts of extracurricular jobs, like when the inspectors came annually, so the kiggers as they were called in Irish, or the local priest who came to say mass for the nuns. I would have been called out of class to make them frothy coffee. And Sister Columkill showed me how to do that. You sort of mix the coffee grinds with a little bit of cold water, and then you add the hot milk. And then you had a little doily on the saucer when you served the coffee, and biscuits on the tray. So I had very good early training of being a hostess. But I also, you know, got other jobs. One time I was asked, would I go to the chemist on behalf of the nuns, and I was sent off with a prescription. And I couldn't understand why there was kind of rattling of bottles when I came back. And I sort of very naughtily had a peep in the bag, and there were bottles of Buckfast Abbey wine. So it was regarded as a tonic wine. Now, I don't know whether the nuns were drinking it for, you know, medicinal purposes, or whether that was what the communion wine was. I don't know. But yeah, Sister Columkill was amazing. She also, as I said, took great pride in her students. Maybe I could talk about secondary school as well.
Yes, please. Yes.
Actually, the other photograph, David, that has nuns below Sister Columkill, I could just say a little bit about that. There. So this is just to give you the contrast that the nuns had gone from being this fully clothed, we didn't even know if they had hair or not, to latterly they were much more plain clothed. And in fact, I was amazed at my mother's funeral that some of the sisters I knew while I was in secondary school came, and I could see their hair. It was so astonishing. But I did. The nuns set up the equivalent of a secondary school, and it was a prefabricated building. And again, David, I don't know if you can have those photographs of me with my class group. Yeah. So this will give you an idea of the prefab style of the secondary school. And I'm sitting next to the girl in the sort of pinky jumper, so second from the right. And those are some of my pals from my class. That really brought back memories.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when I started secondary school, we did have a very heavy serge kind of green uniform with a pillbox hat. But within about 2 years, they decided to get rid of school uniforms altogether. I think there's one more picture of, the school group. So just a couple of things to say. The lady in the green suit, so more to the right, she was Mrs. Smith, who was my math teacher. And she was fascinating because she was always very smartly dressed. And I remember her telling us one day that she didn't have time for doing washing and all this and ironing and stuff. So she said all her suits were dry cleanable. Her blouses were nylon so they could wash and drip dry. She used to have her hair cut extremely short so it would last a long time. And she only ever wore patent or suede shoes. So that was her advice and lesson for life. if you scan across, the nun on the left was Sister Lucy, and she was the head nun of the secondary school. And she's the nun who called me to the office one day where I thought I might be in trouble. But she was basically asking me, had I had the call? And this was, had I had the call to become a nun? And I was 15 and my father had just died. And I burst into tears and said, oh no, sister, I can't, because I'm the eldest. I have to help my mother with the children, and so on and so on. And of course, the nuns were so powerful, I thought she could make me become a nun. But actually, that wasn't the case. And she said that was fine. But they had been just, you know, keeping an eye on me, and they thought I might be suitable, be suitable material. Okay, and I think there's one of the Pygmalion leaflet, David, and that'll be those ones. There. So when this was, the secondary school was called Caritas College, and one of the things I loved was being part of the drama group. And I mean, look how old-fashioned and simple that leaflet is. But in 1974, we put on Pygmalion, and I was Mr. Doolittle, Eliza Doolittle's father. And I remember having to find a bird cage and a waistcoat and so on. And I had my various lines. So we loved the kind of drama and the choir teacher in school. Okay, David, thank you for that.
Yeah, okay. So obviously you enjoyed drama classes. What other subjects did you like doing at school?
Well, interestingly, in when I went to secondary school, we had to do 9 subjects. And I remember when I did my intermediate certificate, so that's kind of like O-levels, I got 7 honours and 2 passes. But my favourite lessons, I really enjoyed history and geography, but also home economics, because anything to do with food, I was always very happy. And it worked that our cookery teacher would do a demonstration on a Tuesday. So she would tell us what the dish was and demonstrate how to cook it. And then we had to bring in the ingredients on Friday, and then we did our cooking. But when she prepared the dish on Tuesday, when it was ready, she'd say, now I need a volunteer to taste this and describe it to the class. So I was, up there. And she was marvelous. She said, girls, you must educate your palates, because you'll never know where you're going to be one day. So I was very happy to have my palate educated. Regular basis. Yeah. I think my weakest subject was math. Having said that, the kind of commerce lesson, where we're doing bookkeeping, I love that. So and I enjoyed English. We had a lovely English teacher, and she was really into poetry and so on. And I suppose, just thinking back to primary school, we did have Irish lessons, and our teacher, Mr. Walsh, who was a namesake, was really a very, very good teacher. And he would, on a Friday, if we'd been very good, would tell us ghost stories and things like that. So he sort of made it worthwhile doing the lessons and learning.
Sounds good. I was going to ask you to what extent religion played a part in your growing up, but it must have. Did it play a very big part?
Yeah, interestingly, as I was saying, the huge efforts were made to build the church, and the Church of the Assumption, was huge. As I said, it held over 1,900 people or something. I've seen some old photographs, and it kind of brings it all back.
Yeah.
But without question, you were expected to go to Mass on Sunday, and there was the kind of like 10 o'clock Mass. But when we got older and went to secondary school, we used to love going to the youth Mass at 12, because there was a youth choir and they had a band, and all that was a way of getting all the young people into church. But certainly when we were younger, I remember my mother marching the 5 of us like 5 ducks down the road on Sunday. And of course, you had to fast before going to church in order to receive Holy Communion. So we were always dying to get back home to have a cup of tea and some toast. Yeah, so it was very big. And of course, things like making your first Holy Communion and your confirmation were all sort of a big deal in school, and of course in your family. And the church, as I was saying earlier, would have put on things like retreats, and they would have had visiting priests, maybe African missionaries, or priests from different parishes coming in and giving talks. And there was also the Pioneer Association. So you were expected when you made your confirmation to take the pledge and not to drink, to say that you won't drink. In my case, that lasted a few years. I lapped somewhere along the way. Yeah, but as I say, the church was powerful and definitely a very, very big part of our lives.
What were the things that you would have liked to have had differently in your education? Go your, the school. What could have been better?
Well, it's funny, obviously, looking back. I mean, the whole attitude of school was really preparing you for marriage. There was no expectation that anyone from Ballyfermot would go to university. And in fact, in my leaving certificate, so we were down to, I think it was 7 subjects by then. And one of my top 3 was in home economics, but nobody told me that didn't qualify as a subject for getting you into university, although there was no question of us going. So in fact, our careers advice and guidance was all about, you were either going to be a nurse or a teacher or a secretary. So I had this notion that I'd like to learn shorthand and typing, and I was going to be somebody's PA, and I had this vision that I was going to travel the world and be very efficient, but that never happened. So I think what I would have changed, and it probably did change years later, was just that whole attitude about the lower, there were lower expectations of girls, certainly, than boys. Sorry about that.
I noticed one of your photographs. It looked to me like a dog, but I only saw it very briefly.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, well, we growing up, when I was younger, so probably about 7 or 8, I had a black Cocker Spaniel called Flossie. And I absolutely adored this dog. And he was so faithful. He used to walk me to the lane every morning when I went to school. And then he'd be there. He knew what time I'd be coming back, and he'd be there. But he hated men in uniform. So the poor old postman refused to come to the door unless my mother came and, held on to Flossie. But I remember she ran out on the road one day and was killed. And I was absolutely heartbroken.
Oh.
And I went up to the front bedroom and I was bawling my eyes out. I could hear my mother over the fence to the neighbour saying, "Oh, she's heartbroken. I don't know what I'm going to do." And of course, that only encouraged me. I bawled all the louder because I was getting some sympathy. But my brothers loved dogs, and so it seemed we had about three different dogs. The one in the photograph is with my niece, and that was called Benny. And my mother loved him. He was great company for her. But we also had one called Shane and another one called Rex. And they were all, Heinz 57 variety type dogs. But if they got too big or, too boisterous, whatever, my Uncle Barney used to offer to take them off to a farm somewhere to work, or a family who could cope better with them. So I hope that's actually what happened to them, and he didn't have them put down. But yeah, there and of course lots of neighbours had dogs as well. So I remember one dog in particular that was very vicious, and we would always, even though he was behind a gate, we always crossed the road when we passed that particular house.
Oh, okay. No, I suppose I ought to have gone back to. I've done a little bypass there, but what did you do when you left school? With your
Yeah.
considerable collection of examination successes, actually.
Yeah, and you know, I sort of felt ripe for the world. But interestingly, when I was praising Sister Colmkill, one of the things she did for her family, as I said, my mother, by this stage when I was in secondary and at my intermediate certificate, she was widowed by then. So at the age of 40, she was left with 5 children and no income. And they didn't have benefits or anything like that in those days. So it was a real challenge. So my younger sister, had already left school the year before and got a job to help out. And I assumed that I was going to have to do the same. But Sister Colmkill persuaded my mother to keep me in secondary school until my leaving certificate, but that she would get me a little job to help out. So she got me a job in Christina's drapery shop where we lived. And it was run by 2 sisters. So Christina, she was actually called Kitty Noon, but the shop was called Christina's Drapery. And she lived in the flat, lovely 3-bedroom flat above the shop. And so I used to go in on Wednesdays after school, and also Friday evening, Saturday day, and Sunday after Mass. And that really helped out the family, that I could earn some money. But it did, I think, cut down on the time I had for studying, etc. But one of the lovely things about working for Christina was that she used to send me into Dublin City to do shopping for her from time to time. And I also, so that meant I was going to very posh bakery shops, buying beautiful cakes and things that I could never ever imagine tasting. But anyway, then she also, kind of almost like a little buyer, she used to send me into the wholesalers, particularly when it came up to communion time or confirmation time in Ballyfermot, because various families would come in and order an outfit for their child. And then I would select maybe a half a dozen and bring them out. The same with shoes and, jockey hats and all sorts. And then the families would make their choice and we could return what they didn't have. So unfortunately then, and I was too soft, when I got my leaving cert exams and wanted to kind of do something with myself in the world, Christina pleaded with me not to leave them in the shop, because I was a good all-rounder and I could practically run with my eyes closed. So I kind of said, well, I'll stay for a year. And of course, she tempted me by telling me that she would get me onto a window dresser's course and so on. And there was obviously no sign of that happening. And really, when I think about it, besides running the shop, her sister became very ill and came to live with her upstairs. And so I used to go and sit and chat to her and kind of keep her company. And then, as I said, I did all this shopping for the 2 sisters and so on. So I stayed on, but as I say, nothing was happening. And one of my friends from the Peace Corps, which I'll come on to, he worked for Friends Gents Boutique off Grafton Street in Dublin, and that was very high-end gentlemen's clothing. And they also had a women's shop, ladies' clothing, which faced onto Grafton Street. So that was kind of like the posh street. And he asked, he said, they're looking for a shop assistant, would you apply? So I don't think Christina ever forgave me, but I remember being given a time for the interview, and I thought, I've nothing to wear. I, was kind of in jeans and sort of all cash gear. But my sister, who had started work the year before me, she had opened an account in Brown Thomas's. Now, that was the department store. I mean, swanky, absolutely. I used to love wafting through it, getting a free squirt of perfume and out the other end. Well, I could never afford to buy anything. But anyway, she had opened an account and got this beautiful paisley dress and a smart jacket. So I borrowed that to go for my interview, and I got offered the job. And then the dilemma was, what am I going to wear to my first day of work? So I had to get up really early before my sister woke and raided her wardrobe for something, skedaddled before she realized what I'd done. But the lovely thing was that when all the shop assistants were required to model the clothes, to wear them during the day so customers could see what they looked like on. But I did adore that job, and they had 3 floors. The top one was the French floor, very exclusive. It was like only one of every outfit. But I was on what do they call them, separates and accessories, so skirts and blouses and jumpers and belts and those kind of things. But it was a great job, and I loved being in the city centre. There was a real buzz about the place, and I worked with some amazing people.
Did you make a lot of friends while you were growing up, or was it you did have a lot to do at home, didn't you? So
yeah, but and my friends, a lot of them, like my neighbour Deirdre Towers next door, she died quite young. She had a hole in the heart condition. But another friend I had was Marion Monaghan, and she came into Ballyfermot again from the city centre. She was 2 years older than me. And Sister Colmkill put her in my class and asked me to kind of look after her, to help her settle in. And we became great friends. But one of the things that I remembered about that relationship was we both loved, I don't know if any of us saw the programme, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And you had Ilya Kuryakin and Napoleon Solo. And in our fantasy world, I was married to Ilya Kuryakin, and Marion was married to Napoleon Solo. And then we used to borrow neighbours' babies according to the colour of their hair, so they would match our family. And we would waltz around the green and up and down the streets with these babies and discuss what we were, what I was cooking for Ilya for his tea this evening when he came home from being a spy and all of that sort of thing. So a lot of our entertainment was creative and created. Yeah, but I had some lovely school pals. And one of the other things arising out of school was that one of the priests set up something called the Peace Corps, and it was modelled on the American idea of the Peace Corps, where they tapped the talents of young people for the good of the community. And I was involved in the Welfare Action Unit, so did lots of house painting and digging gardens and all of those kind of things. So again, met some amazing people, some of whom I still am in touch with a bit, today. But it was a hugely formative, if you like, experience being part of the Peace Corps. It really broadened your horizons and gave you skills and built your confidence.
oh, it sounds a wonderful idea. It's the sort of thing we could do with. So how long did you work in the city centre in the shop?
Well, then I was there probably about 3 years, and during that time, I was involved, as I said, with the Peace Corps, and started taking youth groups to Corrymeela, which I'll come on and talk about. But really, it was through my involvement with Corrymeela that I became a volunteer there for a year, and then from there was a staff member for a few years, and out of that then I got the opportunity to train as a social worker. So my social work career, if you like, was mostly in Northern Ireland. And I got to work, I think my first job, I was covering maternity leave, and it was in a Bernardo's day centre. And then I went to work in Derry, or Stroke City, as some people used to call it, Derry stroke Londonderry. Or nowadays you have to say Derry, Londonderry to please everybody. Oh. But I had lots of experiences as a social worker there that certainly the college training didn't prepare me for, like stepping over armed soldiers on the road, trying to get in to visit families, and having your car checked going to and from work every day, and evacuating families whose houses had been petrol bombed and stuff like that. So yeah, a very amazing and exciting experience. But my favorite jobs were when I was in, I also had another job in a day centre where we used family therapy techniques in supporting families manage their children. because I felt those were much more holistic. Whereas I felt when I went back into social work in later life, I took a part-time job. It was all about case management and shunting people, from pillar to post, and just barely making sure they were compliant with the law and their childcare and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Oh, what made you think you'd like to be a social worker, though? What drew you to it?
Yeah, again, it was in conversation with the director of the Corrymeela Centre. He was saying, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do next, because my staff job was on a 3-year contract.
Right.
And at Corrymeela, we had lots of the community members who were in social work and nursing and teaching, all sorts of careers. And so he put me in touch with one of the community members, and I had a chat, and he said, yeah, all your experience of working with families at Corrymeela and your own experiences growing up, he said, I think you'd be a good candidate. And so I managed to do what was then the diploma in social work. And then a few years after that, to make it up to degree level, we had to do an extra year's training and study.
You mentioned the presence of the army. Would you say it made a great? I mean, and you remember the Peace Corps. Did you? How much did it make you think? About peace in a more general way.
Well, if I go back to, as I said, when I was in the Peace Corps in Ballyfermot, and we used to go and do weekend work camps at the Glen Cree Reconciliation Centre.
Right.
And that was set up to try and make some sort of response to the war in Northern Ireland, to the conflict there. And so they used to run conferences and retreats and education seminars and all sorts of things. But on weekend work camps, there was a group who came from the Corrymeela Centre down for a weekend, and I brought a group of young people from where I lived, and so we worked, digging trenches and doing all sorts of things for a weekend together. And it was there that I met the Corrymeela youth worker, Billy Kane, and then started taking young people to the north, to the Corrymeela Centre. And I remember being offered 16 places, but I could only get 8 young people to come the first trip, because parents were terrified. They thought, we were all going to be blown up and so on. And of course, when you're young, you don't, you're just full of adventure, and you think you're invincible.
Yes.
But after the 8 came back and everybody heard the fabulous time they had, the brilliant fun they had, the people they met, and the disco on Saturday night, I never had any problem filling places again. And it was really through that connection that I decided to spend a year as a volunteer. The interesting thing was that I was actually engaged to be married at 21. I was engaged to a corporal in the Irish Army, Tony. He was, in Ballyfermot parlance, known as a fine thing. Tall, handsome. And of course, the important thing was my mother loved him. But you had that thing where he had the opportunity to go and serve in Bosnia for 6 months, a tour of duty. And the idea was that he was going to raise the deposit for a house. But it was while he was away that I got very involved with Corrymeela. Saw there was a whole big world of adventure out there, and decided that I was really too young to get married. So I broke his heart, apparently. But as I say, it was that really then, having the year at Corrymeela for me was almost like a gap year, right, because I'd had all this responsibility for my siblings and working and all sorts of things, and this finally felt like an opportunity just for me. And it was an amazing experience. I met people from all over the world, and really felt that the work we were doing was so important to try and eventually bring peace in Northern Ireland. Of course, it took years, but Corrymeela certainly was a big contributor to that.
At what point did you? Sorry, no, go on. Please.
So I was just going to say, if David could find the Glen Cree and Corrymeela photographs, I'll just give you a little idea of
Right.
what they were like.
I don't. David still. I can't. I need a bit more training with this still. I can't see all the pictures. There. That's the dog. Got the dog at the moment.
Yeah, he has to go through it.
Uh,
Yes, they are. So okay. So if you go back to the one just before that, David, please. Right. So that's the Glen Cree Centre, and it was in the Wicklow Mountains and was originally a reform school for delinquent boys. And of course, it eventually shut down. And as I say, the Glen Cree steering group was formed, and they started having retreats and weekends away for people and work camps and so on. So I can certainly remember scraping walls, cleaning windows, digging trenches, doing all sorts of things. But it was a superb adventure. But as you can see, it was a beautiful setting. And coming up from Ballyfermot and Dublin to that kind of countryside was just a real relief and kind of time out for us all. And then the Corrymeela Centre was the other photograph. Right, so the Corrymeela Centre was on the North Antrim coast, and you can see over the buildings Fairhead, and where the sea that you can see to the left opposite there was Rathlin Island. So the buildings we're looking at, the low building at the front was kind of like the Arts and Crafts Centre, and that was built by Annika Rice and her team. There used to be just a shed there originally that we used, but she and her team came and built that. And then the house behind it was kind of the main accommodation for groups. But there are two other residential blocks, if you like, on site. So they can have 3 different groups going on at any one time. But again, you can see the most beautiful part of Northern Ireland, gorgeous beaches down at the bottom of the hill. Again, a beautiful place to spend time.
I've never been to Ireland. It looks very tempting altogether.
Thank you, David. That's really helpful.
So at what point did you decide that England was where you were going to live? Or was it a temporary arrangement to start with?
No. Basically, I got married, and my husband came to Ireland, but didn't really settle. He felt he felt there was almost like a big X on his head saying, "I am British," and therefore a foreigner, and probably your enemy. I suppose it didn't help that at the time I had a house on the old military road in County Wicklow, where rumours were rife that the IRA used to do their practices in the woods. Anyway, long story short, he became a prison chaplain in the north of England, and so we moved over 6 months after we got married. Yeah.
Gosh, how much of a culture shock was that?
Well, I think having had 13 years in the north of Ireland sort of was a very good, introduction to the ways of the UK, if you like. So I didn't feel I had any problem settling in. Did you?
Which part of the north of England was it? Whereabouts?
So we were in Acklington, which is just above Morpeth.
Yeah.
And the prison used to be an old barracks, with those sort of half roly-poly buildings. And the vicarage that we lived in was originally the house that belonged to the army captains and whatever. So it was a nice, solid sort of four-bedroomed house, which was really nice to live in. But I worked in the city and used to there was only one train in and out every day, so that's how I got about. And it was a disaster if I missed the train. My husband had to drive and get me, which didn't go down very well.
What's the countryside like around there?
Lovely. Interestingly, immediately around the prison and that, there used to be lots of hills of slack, I think they called it, where there used to be mining and so on. So there were all these kind of hills. So the council worked really hard to green up the area. You know, they planted lots of trees, created grass areas, and made it look really nice. But we were very close to Holy Island and sea houses, and you know, and very close to the border into Scotland. So we were spoiled for choice of gorgeous places to go, Alnwick Castle and all of those.
How did you feel having left Ireland and your family, I guess? Was it lonely, or did you make friends easily?
Yeah, no, I had no problem making friends, and you know, I sort of got involved in things when I was a social worker and at one stage and lived in Coleraine. Again, I did things like I joined the volunteers who worked in the local theatre, which was part of the university, and so you did all sort of activities from working in the bar to giving out tickets, showing people their seats and all this type of thing. And there was a wine club I belonged to, and I also belonged to a vintage car club, and so on. So again, sort of different friends led you into different pursuits and activities, and all very, very sociable and enjoyable.
Thanks, Ben. I know I've got you into England, and I think I ought to let other people ask you some questions now, because I know I haven't brought you quite up to date. But I don't. Well, is that okay? Are you happy with me inviting?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Well, okay. Questions from the rest of you, please, because I'm sure I've missed out all sorts. And also, as I say, I've only got her into the north of England so far.
Ray?
Right. Well, I suppose the question I would ask is, when did you discover Friends?
Ah,
That's
well, you know, really good question. My initial exposure to Friends, if you like, was through Corrymeela. There were several amazing Quakers. You know, when I look back and think about what they were involved in. There was one couple who'd retired from Scotland, and they had bought like a shepherd's cottage and did it up, which they eventually then left to the Corrymeela community as a mini retreat centre. But they were instrumental in planting lots of trees. They were very environmentally aware, and they planted lots of trees on the edge of the site, because of course we had the North Atlantic winds coming in and shredding everything. But that particular gentleman was also doing a lot of work behind the scenes with courts in Belfast and so on. And in fact, he was instrumental he got me involved in doing these visits to police stations where you were trained up to and you know, so that you could arrive anytime, day or night, and ask to see anyone who has been held there, to make sure that their rights had been read to them, that they were being fed, that you know, there was nothing untoward or any mistreatment going on. So there was a lot of that kind of work. Again, some of the others were involved in setting up family activities at the prisons, so that when families came with their little ones, you know, they could have a cup of tea and they could have some toys to play with and so on. So yeah, so that was my first exposure to, if you like, Quakers, and a lot of the work they did behind the scenes. And that of course, a lot of their interest was also to do with, that's why they were interested in Corrymeela, because of the peace work. So I met John and Diana Lampin, whom some of you would have come across through the years, and they used to come and work as part of the summer program, driving buses, leading worship, and all sorts of different things. And then they eventually moved to Derry and John was a teacher there for a time, and Diane worked with a women's group. So again, yeah. Marianne?
Did you ever meet at Glen Cree? Did you ever meet somebody called Geoffrey Corrie?
Yes, indeed. Yes, yes. In fact, gosh, I'd forgotten all about Geoffrey. Somewhere along the way, Geoffrey, when I worked in Tala, another new town, we set up a mediation centre, and he worked with us on doing our training and so on. Yeah, super guy. So you would have known him through the mediation network, maybe?
Yes. Yeah, at one point I had quite a lot to do with him.
Wow.
And I knew about the scheme in Tala, and he invited me to they had something called the Mediators Institute Ireland, which was all people from all different kinds of mediation, family and community and workplace and all sorts. And he invited me to come and do a whole series of workshops, which was in the northwest of Ireland, not quite by the border, on the River Shannon. I can't remember the name of the town. But anyway, so I kind of met lots of people in the field, and I had lots to do with him, sort of, when I was working for Mediation UK, and when there was a kind of, I don't know, there's a kind of, everything was like a kind of pioneering spirit.
Yes.
And
yes.
And I knew he'd done lots of work at Glen Cree.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Great to make those links.
All words.
Are you still in touch with him? I'm not at the moment.
No. Maybe it's no surprise that I'm involved with peaceful schools now.
Yes.
And peer mediation.
Yeah.
I did randomly remember just when I was in secondary school, the other thing I thoroughly enjoyed was they had the Ballyfermot Community Association set up their own Ballyfermot television, and I got to read the news on that several times. But then the radio station that partnered with the group to make it, put out the programs, they had financial troubles, and so it went by the wayside. That was great fun. Good evening. Here is the news, read by Roisin Brannock.
Maybe we could do with a Quaker news station. Putting a positive slant.
Yeah. Mary? Oh, you're on mute, Mary?
Were you ever made to feel that you were sinful and full of badness? You seem to have just bounced and the transferring from being a Roman Catholic to not being one, I would have expected to be quite difficult.
Well, Mary, that's a really good question. And I think that the path was made easier because of my experiences in Corrymeela, because all of a sudden here I was exposed to Protestants and people from all faiths and none, and having these amazing conversations with people from abroad. So the sort of rigid Catholic upbringing, if you like. And I mean, I must say I'm always in danger of putting down my Catholic experience, but actually it was a bedrock, a founding, an integral part of who I am today. Certainly what it excelled at was in instilling, good basic principles of kindness and caring and look out for your neighbour and all of those things. But there was could be quite a punitive side to it. And thank goodness for weekly confession. So you could go and confess your sins. and be absolved and then relax for another week or fortnight, whatever it was. But yet, Mary, that transition I think was eased by my involvement in Corrymeela. So I would have had a lot of guilt when I was younger, just because it was, you know, instilled into you. But it was so freeing, because I was amazed, obviously, when I married Michael. He was a priest in the Church of England, and I started going to his services. That there was kind of, everybody was absolved at the beginning of the service in a way, collectively. So you didn't have to be going in with your list and wondering whether you were going to be asked to say 10 Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers, or whatever the penance was that you were going to be given.
Well, were people against you marrying somebody who wasn't a Catholic?
No, because I think everybody got to know. They knew I'd met him at Corrymeela. That was where we initially connected, and so all my friends liked him. And for my dearly departed mother, she said he was the nearest thing she was going to have to having a priest in the family, because that was a real coup. If you had a priest or a nun in your family, that somehow got you extra kudos in the community. But yeah, and he's very affable and fun and friendly, so there was no problem there.
Are you still in touch with your brothers and sisters?
Yes, absolutely. We have Viber, which is kind of like a WhatsApp page. So my middle brother sends us daily lovely pictures and greetings and so on, and then we exchange photographs and news and so on. And then I get home usually once a year. I've kind of cut back because I'm trying to cut down on flying and so on. And yeah, we're very, very close and get on really well, and just love, you know, when I visit, it's it's a great excuse for everybody to come together. I usually have to do a sort of split trip to the north first to see all my cousins, and then my family, although we were all brought up in Dublin. One lives in, 2 of them live in County Clare, and my sister lives near Galway, and my middle brother now is just above County Kildare. So they're not actually living, there's none of us living in Dublin anymore. Christopher?
Yeah, from having heard you just then introduce yourself on the radio, have we been pronouncing your Christian name wrong all the time then?
No, it's Rosaline, if you give
Right.
me my full title.
Right.
But I found when I went to the north of Ireland that I got called Rosaline, Rosemary, all sorts of things. And so the shortened to Rosie seemed to take care of all of that. Yeah, so Rosaline. I did.
Rosaline, but that's not what you said when you introduced yourself. You know, you did the
Oh,
radio
no,
bit.
no. Yeah, Roisin Brannock is my Irish name.
Ah,
So Roisin for Rosaline, and Brannock is the Irish version of Walsh.
right.
Yeah. So of course, yeah, it was your Irish name that was used in school, particularly in primary school a lot. Roisin Brannock, yes. And I was called Rosaline after my mother. I was her firstborn. She was Rose, and Rosaline means little rose.
Right. Great.
Well, you've painted a picture of a totally positive person, bouncing from, you know, one challenge to another, and really influences other people for the good.
Now, I've certainly always had a positive outlook on life. Times were tough, of course, when I was growing up, but it was always about, you know, community spirit and making the best of what you had, and you know, neighbours helping each other out and that type of thing. So I feel like it's carried me through my life. Try and see the positive in things.
You mentioned your father's disability. Is that?
Yeah, interestingly, he although he had potentially had two siblings, one died at birth and the other at the age of 2, I think. He was basically an only child, and he was very. He had fought in both the Irish Army and the British Army, and through the British Army he became a prisoner of war and so on. And I think he was always a kind of quiet man, but he'd clearly been traumatized in some way. And I can remember my mother saying that he used to have horrendous nightmares, but she would try and talk to me, he would never say what happened to him. And of course that kind of meant that when he came home from work, my mum would say, "Now be quiet because your daddy's tired," those kind of things. But I think he probably had post-traumatic stress disorder, without us knowing that that's what it was called. And I think in a way, when he went to work in England, it suited him to be on his own. And then basically he came home to die at 57. He had lung cancer, which he was, a perpetual smoker when we were growing up. So yeah, and I think he suffered depression as well, again undiagnosed. So as I say, he was more of a distant figure than my mother, obviously.
Did you spend the most of your life following your husband around from kind of church to church and placement to placement?
Yes. Interestingly, as I say, he started off as a prison chaplain. So, and those posts were usually, you were encouraged just to stay for about 3 years, so you didn't become over familiar and so on. And then we moved to near Devizes. We actually lived in Frome, but he was prison chaplain in Devizes, and then decided that he'd really like to get into parish work. So that took us to South Taunton near Oakhampton. So we had 3 different parishes to look after. And of course, that was when I took a year out to be the vicar's wife and join the WI and make the coffee mornings, and the ladies tried to teach me flower arranging.
And the cakes.
Oh yes. Lots of cake baking, endless cake baking and scones and things like that. But it was lovely because one of his parishes was South Seal, and they had the folk festival there every year. So people used to come on from the Sidmouth Festival to South Seal, and that was marvellous. We had a great time with all the musicians in the town, and Michael would have led the Sunday service where some of the musicians were invited to take part and so on. So you were guaranteed to have the church packed on that particular Sunday. And then his final parish was, he'd been asked would he move to Newton Abbot, and it was from there that we retired. But yes, so I had to follow him around, and then insert myself into a job wherever I was, knowing that it wasn't going to be permanent.
And did you have kids as well?
No, I've never had children, but Michael had has 2 children from his first marriage, and they live in his son lives in Bridgewater, so Tom has 3 children, and then his daughter lives near Thornbury, and she's a teacher, but doesn't have any children.
And this is maybe a stupid, sensitive question, but is he still with you, or
Michael?
Yeah.
Yes.
Lovely.
He's in the kitchen.
Oh, that's wonderful.
He knows where his bread is buttered.
Yeah. Yes. I mean,
But he hasn't transferred to Quakers then as well?
No, I was going to say, we discovered the Portishead Quakers kind of by accident. We were driving back from something in Clevedon, and I saw the sign, and I said, oh, I'd love to go and because I had always promised myself that when we both retired, I would decide what I wanted to do faith-wise. and I was going to try out the local Church of England and the Catholic Church and so on, and then decide where I felt drawn. And I'd been to the Protestant churches. I was going to go to the Catholic Church in Portishead, but then I discovered Quakers and I never looked back. Michael came with me to the first meeting just to check them out. But he was very supportive of me joining. There was never any question about that. His only regret is that I'm very involved. I can't help myself.
Well,
So
Good.
I think we can safely say, Rosie, that we are blessed to have you with us.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
oh, that's so lovely. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Right. Then, dear friends, have we come to the end of a delightful hour? We have. Then, Patsy, the question of the day now is, what happens next week? Because I don't have a list, I'm afraid.
Oh dear, that's my fault. I only finished it this morning.
I must admit I am remiss in not asking you before. So
That's fine. Well, I mean, I might as well stick an apology in here, everyone, because I have been unsuccessful in finding a speaker for the 8th of March. So if anyone would either like to come forward or recommend someone else for the 8th of March, I would be extremely pleased to hear from you. But next week, we've got David. Oh golly, please let me remember the name properly. I think it's David Roberts. He is the clerk to Sidcutt School.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to talk to us. It's a Quaker school, principally. And he's going to talk to us about the school, introduce it to us, basically. And so he's next week. And then the week after, I'm afraid I'm still hoping to get someone. All the other Fridays are filled in. It's just the 8th of March I'm stumbling on.
thank you, Patsy. Well, friends, we have reached the end. And hopefully we will see you all next week. As my usual remiss, tell everybody, tell your friends, tell your cat.
Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to indulge in my trip down memory lane. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Really interesting talk. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Now how do we help?
Thanks, Rosie.